Thank you so much for sitting with us over the course of the day. It's been super insightful so far, and lots of reflecting that I will be doing here today. We're moving on to our third panel, which will be chaired by Ketaki, being in Nationalism. So a little bit about Ketaki Zodgekar. She is a writer and musician in her final year at the University of Edinburgh, studying politics and philosophy. Her research interests are in national identity, migration, and criminal justice, particularly through the lens of race and queerness. In the past year, Ketaki has worked at and written for The Guardian, London, and Western Writers, a speech-writing organization in New York City. She loves music, hosts radio shows, and performs as a singer-songwriter. Check out her work at ketakizodgekar.wordpress.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Welcome to this panel. My name is Ketaki, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So this panel is on being and nationalism. Following on from Britain's legacy of colonialism, people of colour are expected to simultaneously integrate into British culture, but also do so without polluting whiteness. How do we as people of colour construct our identities within this unattainable standard? Is British culture or Britishness synonymous with whiteness? And should we be questioning why we would want to adopt a form of Britishness in the first place? I hope that the next hour will be an ambitious exploration of identity. So the first part of this panel will be a discussion, and after that we'll open up the floor to the audience so that everyone can join in. I'll start by introducing the panelists. First up, over here, we have Jackie Kay. Jackie was born and brought up in Scotland. Her novel, The Adoption Papers, won the Forward Prize, a Saltire Prize, and a Scottish Arts Council Prize. Fire was shortlisted for the Costa Award, and her novel Trumpet won the Guardian Fiction Award and was shortlisted for the Impact Award. Red Dust Road won the Scottish Book of the Year Award and the London Book Award, and was shortlisted for the J.R. Ackley Prize. Jackie's third collection of short stories, Reality, Reality, was praised by The Guardian as ranking among the best of her genre. Jackie was awarded an MBE in 2006 and made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2002. Her book of stories, Wish I Was Here, won the Decibel British Book Award. Jackie Kay also writes for children, and her book, Red Cherry Red, won the Clype Award. She's written extensively for stage and television, and her plays were a great success. Her most recent collection, Bantam, was published in 2017 to critical acclaim. Jackie is Chancellor of the University of Salford and Professor of Creative Writing at Newcastle University. Jackie Kay was named Scots Maca, the National Poet for Scotland, in March 2016. Here's Jackie. Next to me over here is Reeta. Reeta Loy is a musician, aka Loyal, writer and co-founder and CEO of Gaysians, the UK alliance of LGBT+ charities, support groups and activists serving the South Asian community. She is a diva columnist, community engagement officer for UK Black Pride, Forbes 100 Women Founder, and ranked in 2018 in the Guardian Pride Power List, and for the past year was publisher of Burnt Roti magazine, the UK's leading contemporary platform for South Asians. Reeta's creative work and activism focuses on the ownership of our queer and cultural selves within our bodies and creating spaces that support this, and promoting visibility and positive narratives of South Asian LGBT+ people. Here's Reeta. And on my left over here is Suki Sangha. Suki's political activism began as a student when she got involved in anti-war campaigning around the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the subsequent rise of Islamophobia. Over the years, she's been involved in different grassroots campaigning, incorporating different issues from anti-racism and anti-fascism work to anti-austerity campaigning. Suki has been actively involved in the Scottish trade union movement for many years and currently the chair of this, do you say it's STUC?
The STUC.
STUC, sorry, Black Workers Committee, and represents black workers on the STUC General Council. She comes from a youth work background but now works as a trade union organiser. Suki is a founding member of Rise, Scotland's Left Alliance, a new political party in Scotland. She ran as a candidate in the recent Holyrood elections. She's on Unite Scottish Executive Committee and sat on the STUC General Council in 2014 to 2015. She is also the Vice Chair of the Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Committee. Suki's written articles about the importance of engaging women at every level of politics. She's been a huge supporter and organizer in the campaign to end 0 hours contracts. She's represented young workers on the STUC Youth Committee, and she's worked for equality on behalf of Black, Asian, and ethnic minority workers across Scotland. We're not entirely sure how Suki manages to find time to do anything else, but with a schedule like that. But Suki's also an incredibly talented artist, posting pictures of works in progress on her Twitter account. Colour us impressed. So I'd like to kick off this discussion with a very broad question posed to all of our panelists, which is, what does Britishness mean to you? Do you identify as British? And if not, what do you identify as, if anything? Would you like to start, Alt?
Yeah, sure. I identify as British, I identify as British Indian. In terms of what Britishness means to me, I think it depends where I am and who I'm talking to. I think there is, when I go to India, it's a different experience of defining myself as British. I kind of, in some ways, I feel a bit ashamed. And, there I guess I'm sort of perceived I've been called white when I've been in India before. I get called a Paki here, so it's kind of, it's interesting. It's based on perception and it's based on where you are. But yeah, I think in terms of Britishness, I feel like we're really in our infancy in terms of really trying to define what it is to be British and something, or Indian British or Asian British or however you want to call it. Because there is something quite unique and special about that experience and being bicultural. And I think in many ways being bicultural for me personally means that I don't really ever feel at home anywhere fully. So it's kind of, I think it's about us creating whatever that is, because it has its own sort of uniqueness to it. And we were talking about this earlier, sort of things like going into the freezer and thinking you're taking out a tub of ice cream and actually it's dal, like things like that, just kitsch, chintzy stuff that your parents buy, like, a little mini Taj Mahal snow globe thing that I love that my mum gave me, but it's, tacky and chintzy. But, these kind of weird little things that we kind of have to own and celebrate in order to really celebrate being bicultural.
How about you, Jackie?
Yeah, no, a lot of that completely resonates with me. I don't think I define myself as British, though, at all. I would define myself as Scottish, but not as British, because to me, being British is slightly more problematic.
Yeah.
To put it nicely at the moment. But yes, I would define myself as Scottish, but I would define myself as Afro-Scottish or Black Scottish, or, because I don't see myself as just Scottish in the way that, say, a white Scottish person would see themselves, and I don't ever hope to be nor want to be have that kind of relationship with Scotland in a way, because I've grown up always having a different one, and that's gone in, and I've learnt to value and treasure the being an outsider inside, being an outsider in your own country. It's not so much that that it makes you a stranger in your own country. It's more that it can make you a stranger to yourself in the mirror for a long time. And so I've grown up with that, and come to, now that I'm the grand old age of 56. No pause, nobody saying surprise, nothing. nothing. I kind of feel like I've come to a different understanding of that. So being black and being Scottish to me doesn't anymore seem like a contradiction in terms, in the way that it used to, or in the way that people used to respond to you, So, and I had lots of experiences of that. I'd go and sit in a chair. I went to go and sit in a seat in a pub in London, and this woman said, "You can't sit in that chair, that's my chair." I went, "Oh, all right, you're from Glasgow, aren't you?" And she went, "Aye, how did you know that?" I said, "I'm psychic." And I said, "I'm from Glasgow myself." And she went, "You're no, are you? You foreign-looking bugger." And I had that kind of thing all the time, So you go into a shop in Drimmen, spelt dry men, but pronounced Drimmen. But lots of dry men about in Drimmen. And I go to try on the top, and my mum was say that colour suits you, and this complete stranger came up to me and said, I think that colour suits you too, dear. Where are you from? So I said, I'm from Glasgow, and she went, is that right? Because I've got a friend from the Dominican Republic. my son had that made in a t-shirt for me one Christmas. On the front it said, I've got a friend from the Dominican Republic. On the back it said, what have you got, you sad bastard? Anyway, so it's taken quite a long time to get to an ease, I suppose, and it's interesting now being the Macker, or being the National Poet of Scotland, because I would have never dreamed that I'd have ever been made the National Poet of Scotland. Thank you. And part of never having dreamed of that was because I felt too much outside, you know. My mum said to me when I became the Macker, she said, who would have ever thought that wee baby we brought home in a basket would one day grow up to be Macker? Which paradoxically reminded me of a 70s cartoon where the midwife comes holding a baby and the little speech bubble says it's a lesbian. but anyway, so I always felt outside being both lesbian and black, and growing up in Scotland at a time when there weren't many other kids my colour to play with. And then growing up in a trade union house, in a socialist house with communist parents who were anti-apartheid, but not really having a sense of the way that you could be and should be critical of Scotland and its relationship to the slave trade or its tobacco laws or whatever. So I think being black in Scotland continues to be a journey, and I think being black and British anywhere is a journey. It's a never-ending journey that you're on, not a journey to one place or another, but a journey in your mind between one state of consciousness, if you like, and another. And that's to me, it's a never-ending journey. It's an ongoing story, and the more that you realise that it's an ongoing story that doesn't necessarily get resolved or end easily, then the better you are in a way. That's it. See you later.
Sit down.
Bye. See you. I wouldn't want to be here.
That's fantastic, thank you. How about you, Suki?
I've always found it really difficult to identify as British for obvious reasons in terms of, you know, Britain's role in the empire. My political activism, like's already been kind of said, started around anti-war campaigning when I was a student, you know, taking to the streets over, you know, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And for me, looking at what Britain's role in the world was, and, you know, what it was doing at the time, and for me, you know, that idea of Britishness means fairness, when on the one hand you're hearing this and it's drummed into you from a very early age, but on the other hand you're seeing the contradictions in that, in terms of, you know, the way in which, you know, British attitudes are towards immigration, to Islam, to refugees. So, you know, constantly feeling this contradiction. You know, I'll talk a wee bit about my journey into political activism kind of later on as well, but I've found it really difficult to kind of identify as British. For me, Scottish is maybe something that is more close to where I would identify in terms of being Scottish Asian, but I always prefer to kind of call myself an internationalist. That's kind of my starting point as a socialist. I tend to see myself as someone part of a world where, you know, you connect with people regardless of where they are, regardless of borders and all the rest of it. But for me, Britain, you know, there was this quote as I became politically active. For me, it started to symbolise everything that Britain stood for, you know, and you've probably heard it before, but it's the sun never set on the British Empire and the blood never dried. And for me, that was quite important to understand what Britain was doing, you know, across the world, but also the consequences of what they were doing across the world on ordinary people of colour in Scotland and Britain as well. So I've always found it really difficult to identify as Britain. But there was a time that I did, and I will talk about that kind of later, but it's something that I just totally, not me.
Something that's quite striking from the responses is that I think both Jackie and Suki have quite strong attachments to, I guess, the Scottish identity. Like, you write about Scotland a lot in your poetry in this really, like, loving way, and you really clearly, like, identify with, like, a Scottish trade unionist background. Do you think there is something quite distinct about Scottishness as opposed to Britishness? And do you think that an independent Scotland would be a, like, way of realising that, or do you think it's like a not a
thing that would lead to like more inclusion or like a broader national identity?
You're asking me that first?
Whoever.
Do you want to go first? Yeah,
I
why
don't
not?
know. Okay. Okay, I suppose there's contradictions in all of that, isn't there, in terms of whether you identify as Scottish or whether you identify as British. And when you identify as Scottish, I identify as Scottish, I suppose, but understanding that actually Scotland wasn't, you know, it's not that Scotland wasn't involved in colonialism, it isn't that Scotland doesn't have statues and streets named after slavery. I mean, there's recognition of all that. But I think when it comes to the independence question in particular, many of us campaigned on a radical left vision for what we saw independence as. So although there was the mainstream campaign from the Yes campaign, which was SNP led, there was also the radical independence campaign that many of us were involved in. And for us, that was about creating a Scotland which actually broke the British state. And by breaking the British state, what we meant was breaking from its colonial past. You know, it's recognising what it does, but it still continues to play a massive role in the world, on the world field. So it was about how do you strike the greatest blow to British nationalism, I suppose. And for me, that's what that was certainly what we were thinking in terms of, well, how do you build a Scottish independence based on actually raising the issues in terms of the issues that impact people of colour in Scotland, having the argument about the fact that actually Britain as a state symbolises something, and how do you break from that? So it wasn't about draping ourselves, you know, with the national flag and, you know, talking about Scotland as a special place and the haggis and the kilts and all the rest of it, and identifying with that kind of Scottishness. For many people it is, and that's, you know, I totally respect that, you know, because people need a sense of identity, of course. But for us, it was about, well, how do you strike the greatest blow to the British state? And that's the campaigning sort of work that we did in terms of, well, for us that as an institution represents something, and it represents the colonialism, the racism that still oozes today from it. And for us it was about, well, how do we position ourselves differently? So, you know, in an independent Scotland, I've no doubt there'd still be racism. Of course there'd be. We don't exist in a vacuum. We're still all part of a global economic capitalist system, you know, and that means that you can't isolate Scotland away from everything else as if it's a bubble, as if we don't have our own racists here. You have to fight where you are, though. And for us, it was a small part of a bigger picture, and a bigger strategy in terms of how you do that.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. I think that when you think about Jekyll and Hyde and doubles that kind of run through the theme of Scottish literature, the theme of doubles and boths and doppelgangers and having extraordinary different mirrors, I think that sums up my relationship to Scotland. I think that as a country we are growing up, and we've changed massively in the course of just the last 30 years. I mean, we're the country that says welcome to refugees. We're the country that voted, or would have voted even 68% now to remain in Europe. We're a small country that looks out to the world. And so when you ask us how is being Scottish distinct from being British, I could point to all of these different things and all of these different ways in which Scotland, we have extraordinary politicians here. We have an amazing First Minister. We even have an amazing opposition, a leader of the opposition. We have extraordinary debates. When you look at how the Yes campaign was conducted in Scotland compared to, say, how the Brexit referendum happened across the UK, you see massive differences. In Scotland, young people could get the vote from 16. They had big public meetings in public halls everywhere, whether you were a yes or a no, whether you were the 48% or the 52%. People really engaged in it all, and they knew what it was they were voting for. In the UK as a whole, only 27% of the population of the UK actually voted for Brexit, and yet 68% of the Scottish population is now going to have to go through that. That seems to me to be absolutely undemocratic. I can't understand why people keep saying that it's democratic when you're talking about 27%. In Scotland, they had this rule that if less than 40% of people voted for a yes or for a no, for a yes referendum, that the vote wouldn't count. So that vote of 27% wouldn't have counted had it been in Scotland, and I find that quite a fascinating thing. So there's lots and lots of differences, but I think that, you know, in order to move forward as a country, we have to be able to acknowledge our past, and we have no museum in Scotland that acknowledges the legacy of slavery. For instance, there's one in Liverpool, there's one in London. Manchester's acknowledged its relationship with the slave trade, Bristol has, and Scotland as a country hasn't, and that needs to change. People Kids in Scotland need to be educated about the tobacco laws, about the Museum of Modern Art that's in Glasgow actually being built on money from the slave trade, about, that if they went to Jamaica, every second name in Jamaica, place name, is a Scottish surname because of all the Scottish slave owners that were there. The great bard Robert Burns himself nearly went to Jamaica and became an overseer. So we kind of worship Burns, for instance, and I worship Burns. I love his work. I think he's wonderful. But I still have to be able to criticise Burns. And we've got this kind of this slightly childish thing that if you criticise something, it means that you don't love it. It's got to be either or. But actually, we are large. We contain multitudes. And I'm kind of heartened by the ways in which, say, Scotland has changed in its attitude to gay people over the years. It's now meant to be the most gay-friendly country to live in the whole of Europe. I don't know if other people find that to be true, but the other day I was in the Isle of Uist, because I've been going about the place, as Macker, and I got to Uist and I was amazed at the massive lesbian turnout. So I said to the woman that was driving me about the next day, in her middle 70s, I said I was surprised to see the big lesbian turnout last night. And she went, "Aye, we managed to hang on to our lesbians." She said, "We lose our gay men, no." And that kind of sentence just wouldn't have been thinkable just even 5 years ago. And so I got on the boat, the next day from Benbecula to Harris, and waving goodbye at all the lesbians left. Looking around the boat to see all the gay men leaving. But anyway, and I thought, wow, Scotland is really changing,
Sounds like a modern day Lesbos.
Yeah. Well.
Sweet. Like making a list of places to visit right now.
Get yourself to Uist.
On the theme of queerness, though, I'd like to ask a question to Reeta. So something I've been thinking about lately as a queer Indian person is obviously the repeal of Section 377 in India that happened a few weeks ago. And I've been thinking about, how changes in law correspond to changes in actual national opinion. And then the extension of that is in the Indian community, a huge number of us are diaspora kids, and we've been living in places where it's been legal to be queer for a long time. And how do you think that the repeal of Section 377 is going to impact Indians around the world and is also in India?
I think in India, they're still celebrating, but at the same time, there's been a huge backlash, as we expected there to be. There are still a lot of really conservative ideals there in terms of, there has to be legislative change in workplaces. There have to be there has to be sort of societal on the ground education. So this is the start of a huge amount of work that needs to happen. We've had generations of people being told that homosexuality is a criminal offence. That is going to take time to change. In terms of what's happening in the UK and for diaspora Indians, I think that there was a recent BBC study done. I think they published the results about a month ago, and it found that they compared British Asians to the general UK population, and what they found was that British Asians are much more conservative, which I don't know if that surprises you, but it didn't surprise me, particularly when it comes to homosexuality. And British Asians are twice as likely to not agree with same-sex relationships or disapprove of same-sex relationships as the UK average, as everybody else, basically. So what that tells me is that actually, when we look at British Asians and we look at the media and the film industry and the content that we consume and the news that we consume and the celebrities that are kind of part of our culture and news feed, they're coming generally from Bollywood, generally from India, and yet our parents and grandparents are watching Indian films and media and Bollywood films where there are no queer characters, where it is a very sort of patriarchal system and heteronormative system. And so, if our parents are not seeing queer characters and examples of us anywhere, then how are they ever going to feel that it's something that is actually ancient and part of our history and been part of our culture for far longer than colonialism was? So I think it's really important for us. So we're actually, Asians are putting on a party for any of you in London on Thursday to celebrate the repeal of 377 as a fundraiser in Shoreditch, and that money is going to go to LGBT charities in India that are doing sort of on the ground work for these communities. But I don't think we can be complacent about it. I think we have to talk about it, and I think we have to really ask our allies, so those of us that are not queer and are South Asian, and those of us that are non-Asian, to bring this conversation up. And so, you know, with your families around the table, like, talk about 377, talk about, like, try and, like, find out how people feel about it, and just try and challenge some of those perceptions, really, because it's down to each of us to be having those conversations, because without that, there's not going to be that change, or the change will be much slower.
Thank you. That's great. Like, following on the theme of queerness, as queer people of colour, like, how do you feel like growing up you've had to sort of compromise between your two identities or find a middle space? A lot of queer spaces are incredibly white, and it can often be quite hard to identify with queerness when it's like a very specific type of queerness. And do you feel like you had to negotiate that?
Yes, no, definitely. I feel like I have negotiated that and keep on negotiating that in all different ways. A bit like, you know, that's also part of a never-ending journey. But I remember that, you know, when I was 16, I was in the art class, and this girl in the class called Anne Kerr, who was the school bully. Remember the name? No, so just joking. Just made that name up, actually. That's not really her name. But anyway, she said, Miss, Jackie's a lazy. and the art teacher turned round to me and said, well, are you, Jacqueline? Are you a lesbian? It was really quite a surprise, because I was expecting, you know, and so I said, I don't know, I really don't know, because I wasn't quite sure then at 16. I was sure at 16 and a half. But, anyway, and then I thought I didn't know any other black lesbians, and I thought I might be the only black lesbian in the world.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a great sort of title for a film or something, or a song, you know, the only black lesbian in the world. Could imagine music to it, but I really did think that. And then when I was 17, I went to university at Stirling, and I still didn't meet any other black lesbians at Stirling, but a lover I had at the time found out about this conference that was happening in London called the OWAD Conference, or Organisation of Women of African and Asian Descent. So I went to that, aged 18, so this is 1978, and there I met 50 black lesbians, and I nearly passed out. I was like, whoa, 50 black lesbians! And then we formed this group called the BLG group, and I'm still friends with a lot of those people that were in that group, because it made such a big difference. And then they came to visit me in Stirling, and it was really an amazing thing to have black lesbians take over Stirling. There's only 4 of us, but you know, it felt like that. It felt like a massive takeover. But yes, it was because they didn't actually expect. I mean, then I remember meeting Audre Lorde, and a really fantastic. And she became a really good friend of mine. And she said to me, she taught me one of life's most interesting lessons really quite early. She said, you don't have to choose, Jackie. She said, you can be black and Scottish. You can be lesbian and black. She always did this very long and in between things. The and was a bridge, you know? The and was a bridge to walk over. And that was really good. I thought, yes, you don't have to keep on choosing this kind of arithmetic that we make as being black more important to you than being Scottish, as being queer more important to you than being black. As well. We're always going to be asked to choose. And actually, we do contain multitudes, and it takes quite a long while to get there. But yes, there's lots of kind of white, lesbian, quite queer circles that only take that as their vantage point and didn't include us for years and years. And Audrey was brilliant because she fought against that in all her essays in Sister Outsider. She was like a kind of pioneer so it's really heartening to see that Zami, a new spelling of my name, has just been republished by Penguin as a Penguin classic. And it would have been unthinkable for her to have been a Penguin classic when she was still alive, but she was a pioneer. And I think that some of how we define ourselves goes on the basis of the bravery of the people that have gone before us.
Yeah, completely resonate. Yeah, that resonates totally. I mean, I'm just thinking about like when I was growing up, and I just feel like I've compartmentalized a lot of parts of my identity through a lot of my sort of growing up time, and then so even sort of getting into my sort of 20s and being totally out, even to my family. It's like my Asian friends weren't queer, and my queer friends weren't Asian, so it was like I was still compartmentalizing. So, and I thought I was the only like Indian lesbian as well, like for ages, like. And it was quite a lonely experience actually for a really long time. And so, like for me, what happened was when I came out to my family, they disowned me, so I lost my cultural identity. And so I had to go on a journey to find that for myself, and I did that through cooking, through music. The music that I make, I incorporate a lot of Indian sounds and scales and samples in there. And you know, just the way that I choose to dress, and travelling to India more and more to sort of connect with my cultural heritage, and just getting really fed up of guys called Jeffrey that know more about India than I do, and just kind of going, fuck you, I'm going to India. I think I found myself kind of feeling really isolated and in a relationship with a white woman, and just sort of very cut off from my culture. And so I went on that journey, but I was still lacking those examples of people like me, you know, queer Indian people, queer Asian people, queer Asian lesbians. And there are lots of organisations that exist all over the UK that are there to support people like us, but I didn't know about them, and I couldn't find them on Google because they weren't easy to find in those days. They didn't have the resources and funds to promote themselves. And in the end, what happened was that I started stumbling upon blogs that had been written by queer women in India. And
when would this be? What kind of year?
I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or something. And that was so inspiring for me, and just so overwhelming in terms of just feeling connected. And I think that's what's amazing about this, you know, technology and social media age that we're in now, is that we're able to find our connections and our tribes all over the world, and sort of really do something about those feelings of isolation. And that's led to, you know, us having labels and identities and language developing in the way that it is. But for me personally, that was a huge experience, and then that inspired me to build Gaysians, and the website's gaysians.org, and we're an alliance of those charities and support groups and activists that I mentioned that still don't have a lot of resource to promote themselves. So we do that as an alliance through the umbrella brand of Gaysians, and put on events so that we can see examples of ourselves and other people, and again, sort of build community and participate in events together, and have a collective voice.
Yeah, definitely. Like, speaking to my own experience, I think that there's a lot of sort of rhetoric around it's like, accept yourself, you can be both, blah, blah, blah. But actually, like, actual visibility and like actually seeing people who are like you and who look like you and have similar experiences, and talking to them, like, does incredible things for like actually being able to. So things like Gaysians are very important. But speaking to oh yes, of course.
Just because I can relate to some of the experiences that people are talking about in terms of how you compartmentalise different parts of your life and how actually different things can be quite contradictory. Because as a student, obviously, you know, like I said, I've been completely active around the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So as a student, you know, I was often campaigning around Islamophobia, running about the student campus, chasing off military recruiters because of everything they stood for, right? Fighting against fascism, and then the stuff around police brutality on this side. We'd go out marching in solidarity with the Palestinians. You know, you were doing all this sort of anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist work. But then if I look at the way in which I was shaped at home, it's really different, because actually growing up as an Asian woman, my mum and dad are kind of first generation migrants to Scotland. Actually initially they moved to London, but then they came to Scotland. But I remember growing up, and remember we didn't really talk much about politics growing up. It was never really something that was on the radar. You watched the odd Bollywood film, and there'd be the odd film about what the British Raj did in India, and you'd get really angry, but then that anger would go. There'd be the random remark about what the royal family do, and the fact that they sit in there with your crown jewels, and all the rest of it. There was this kind of undercurrent, but never really all that visible. And I remember growing up, I had pictures on the wall of my grandpa, because he was in the army and he had received the Victoria Cross and stuff like that, so there was all these military connotations growing up as well. And I'm pretty sure there's pictures in the house, I know there's pictures in the house of my grandpa receiving medals from the Queen Mother. So I hate the monarchy on this side, right, as a student, but as a kid I'm growing up with all these connotations and all these pictures. I'm sure there's a picture of Margaret Thatcher on there as well, right? So this is my family, right? So this is what we're kind of assimilating into, because you do, right? So when people move here, especially I think a lot of Asian communities move here, there's that sense of you need to work hard, you need to fit in, you need to assimilate, you need to integrate, and it's sort of drummed into you, and it was certainly drummed into me from a very early age that that's what you've got to do. So I remember when Princess Diana died, it was on the TV, everyone was getting emotional, including myself, right? This was at a very young age, obviously. My mum went to B&Q, she bought that white rose that was, you know, it was as a remembrance thing for Diana and stuff like that. So all that stuff was going on. My mum and dad moved to Scotland, and when they moved to Scotland, they moved to a specific area called Ibrox. People will know that is, there's obviously links to Rangers Football Club. And as a kid, I supported Rangers, right? Even though, like, I talk about the fact that I can't relate to that British identity, it was really contradictory when I was a kid, because I did relate to that, and I didn't really buy into any of the political stuff at the time. As I grew older as well, a couple of years ago, my brother joined the police. So on the one hand, I'm going on about police brutality, yeah, I've got, you know, the right arm of the state in the house because my brother's a police officer. So things are really, really contradictory. Do you know what I mean? You grow up with all these things going on, but then you're doing all these things on the other side, and it's like, you know, trying to find ways in which you can make different parts of your life connect, and it's never easy. Like, you know, I've always found that quite a difficult kind of thing to juggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So Suki, you describe yourself as an internationalist and a socialist.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what is internationalism, and what does it, how does it connect to your socialism?
Okay. I suppose my internationalism and my socialism connects in the way I don't see myself as being part of just a struggle taking place in Britain. For me, everyone is part of a global economic struggle. You know, we're part of a global working class as well. So, you know, that's about recognising that actually what you're doing here in terms of being shafted by your bosses, is shafted by your landlord, it's not just happening to you in Britain, it's happening to you the world over, regardless of where you are. So I suppose as an internationalist, for me, it's about how do we build the links to people in different parts of the world, and when there are struggles taking place in different places, how can we link up with those? How can we use the platforms that we have, whether it be your involvement in the trade union movement or any other platform, to actually raise awareness of what's going on. So I suppose an example of that is stuff going on in Palestine. You know, we often take to the streets over Palestine. There's huge demonstrations that take place across the UK and in Scotland in particular. It's about what you can do in the spaces that you can exist in. You can't do everything, and I suppose you need to recognise that as well. So it's not about saying I'm an internationalist, so actually I do everything, like, you know, and I can't give you concrete examples exactly, you know, of exactly what you've done, but you do what you can where you can, and it's really important that you start to see the struggle as an international struggle, and how that connects with people the world over. I suppose that's kind of what I mean in terms of my international.
Fantastic, thanks. At this stage, are there any questions that anyone in the audience has right now? Just maybe one or two, but we'll open it back out later on. Let me see. Glasses on. Like, kind of wave if your hand is up.
There's somebody.
Oh, there's someone at the back.
Somebody like that.
So do you mind speaking up just a tiny bit?
Yeah, sure. Some of the, I think some of the Japanese was very comfortable in her Scottishness, you know, and I wonder if she was kind of Glaswegianness, because I've grown up in Edinburgh all my life, and my Scottishness is like completely in a vacuum by itself now, because there's really any, you know, Afro-Scots culture in Edinburgh to relate to. I wonder, yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it makes such interest in the specificity of how the Scottish tribal livers feel about being Scottish, and whether that's connected to Glasgow in particular, and whether they feel that sort of kinship with the rest of the country.
Thank you. So I guess it's a question about like specificity of identity. So whether you identify more with being Glaswegian, or whether that's a distinct identity to your Scottishness, or whether they are in any way in competition.
It's interesting. I do, definitely do think of myself as a Glaswegian, a Ouija. But I don't think of myself as, and I think that a lot of my the love of language and humour and syntax comes from love of syntax comes from Glasgow. I mean, I think of my mum as kind of having a Glasgow double. She'll say, "I'm not hungry, but I'm hungry." I'm not tired, but I'm tired. And so I like these kind of doubles, and I like the way that Glasgow people talk, but I like the way that people talk all over Scotland, and the way and how distinct that is, that somebody in the Shetlands talks very differently from somebody in Aberdeen, and talks very differently from somebody in Uist or Colonsay. And I just really love how many different accents that we have as a country across Scotland, and I feel like I've got something in every city, if you like, and in every island in some way. I feel that it relates to me in some way or another. But because I was born in Edinburgh and spent the first 5 months of my life in Edinburgh, and then brought up in Glasgow, so that would make me kind of a bisexual. But I'm not. But you know what I mean? And then I think I was conceived in Aberdeen, in the Granite City. I don't know what happened to me in Dundee, but you know. Anyway, I think that specific identities are interesting, and how much you narrow your identity down. And you know, like my mum's a Fifer. And she was originally a Fifer, and she had that identity, and people from Fife have a very particular identity. People from Shetland have a very particular identity. But I just really love it all. I love hearing the different expressions and the different ways that people see themselves in every part that you go to. And I suppose learning about how people see themselves, whether you're in Colonsay or Aaron, or whether you're in Harris or Bute, wherever you happen to be in Scotland. And I do get to travel around a lot, and one of my ambitions as Macker is to create this, the Macker's Map, create this tapestry really of a large poem of every place I go to. I write a stanza about, because islands are a bit like stanzas, they're surrounded by the sea, and just to take poetry to as many unexpected places as possible, and to try and create this modern map of Scotland and the way in which Scotland's changing. So yes, I feel like, yeah, I belong to Glasgow, but Scotland belongs to me.
Do you feel the same way as a Glaswegian?
I do. I definitely identify as Glaswegian. I think there's that competition between Glasgow and Edinburgh that you can't deny, and if you're in Glasgow, you definitely think Glasgow's better than Edinburgh. I probably think that, right? It's quite a personal question, isn't it? Identity, I think, is inherently quite personal. It just depends on where you are and how you're shaped and how you're conditioned by the things around you. So it's difficult to answer. So yeah, I mean, I'm Glaswegian.
And what are you?
I don't know, I just really want to be Scottish right now.
You can be honorary Scots.
I know. Yeah, I'll take that.
If the Macker says you're Scottish, you're Scottish.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
But it's interesting how, you know, that feeling Scottish or feeling black and Glaswegian or black and Dundonian or whatever isn't necessarily a static state. And identity, I think, is always a fluid state. It's always in constant flux. There's even if you say to yourself that you're, say, black, female, and Scottish, those very facts can change quite a bit. And so I think of identity as something that moves and shifts around, and that we're always asking for fixes. We're always asking for something to be fixed and static, but it's actually not static. It's constantly on the move, and even how we name ourselves and how we call ourselves is constantly on the move. You know, you're all using the term queer, which you're very comfortable with. And I'm still sort of kind of not comfortable saying queer. I can't easily do it, probably because of my age. So I'll say, you know, lesbian or gay or whatever. But then I'll feel quite old-fashioned because I can't just say queer. Terrible. I find it quite difficult because I kind of grew up in a time when that was a real insult, so I haven't managed to get my head around the reclaiming of the word, even though I know there's all of the politics behind it. I find it tricky. So it's just interesting that we're in the same with how we define blackness, you know, that saying mixed race and half caste and all of these terms are actually insulting terms, but people use them, or coloured, or Negro, or so all of these terms have changed, and quite rightly so. But with these changes in terms also comes some change in consciousness and in identity. So nothing is fixed or static, and it'd be interesting to think what we will call ourselves in 50 years' time, whether it will still be queer, or what will it be, because it won't settle. But every time thinks that their word will settle and that that's it, finished and done with. And no time can actually think outside of their time linguistically or any other way and think of what the change might be. And it's the same with changes in technology. You know, we settle and we think, oh God, we've got this, we've got that, but we can't really think ahead to flying taxis and, you know, to us all going to the moon for a day, or whatever. We can't really think ahead in that easy way, and it's the same with identity.
It's being comfortable, I think, with that change, isn't it, within ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, just being comfortable with that movement all the time, being flexible with it.
Yeah. And I was thinking when you were saying about feeling conflicted with your identity and having to kind of stock up really on your Asian identity on your own because your family were no longer giving it to you. I was thinking that for me that's even more problematic because I didn't grow up with any black person. I was adopted into a white family, so I grew up with no cultural anything, and that felt like a real loneliness and emptiness, and it took me quite a long time to even kind of work out properly what was going on. And my brother, who's the same colour as me, still hasn't worked it out, and he's 59, but he would go to London and he'd grow dreadlocks because he didn't brush his hair, but he didn't know that dreadlocks would form, and then he'd come back to London and go, I fucking hate Rastas, man. And I'd say, why? He'd say, they're all nodding at me. So that's because they think you're a Rasta. Me a Rasta? I'm surprised at you saying that. So that's very, And I remember him saying to me, like, when we were 19 and I came back to my family from having been at university and said, that's it, I'm black. And I had, it was like it came to me as I hadn't properly realised. I mean, obviously I've been called names and all of that, but these negative things are not the makings of an identity, negativity. So I came back and said, that's it, I'm black. And my brother said, sister, I want to say to you, you're making a bit of an arse of yourself. Going round telling people you're black. And I said, well, you're making an arse of yourself going around telling people you're white. He went, I'm not saying I'm white. And I said, well, what colour are you saying? Yeah, then. And he paused for a minute and went, fawn. Is it because I is fawn? It doesn't have the same name. But it really took us both, because we were both, brought up with we're not biologically brother and sister, but we're both the same colour, and we're both brought up with these parents that gave us a political sense because they were very politically engaged, but they didn't know how to give us a sense of being Nigerian in my case, or whatever it is in his case, we don't actually know. But so it's strange, and that's kind of taken quite a while. So to say go to read an anthology of stories, as I've just done, from Nigerian queer Nigerians talking about what that experience is like in Nigeria. It's just kind of astonishing when that book's just been published this year, but it's so astonishing because it would have been unthinkable in Nigeria to have had stories come out in a book like that. So it's quite interesting. So you think we're all just really early stages. These are all new. This is all new land. It's all new territory, and we're pioneering. We're walking the steps on it.
Fantastic, thanks. So I think I'm going to finish off with one broad question for the panel to finish, and then we're going to give the mic to the audience. So my final question for the panel is, what does the future of national identity look like, especially in this political time, taking into account big changes that are going to come with Brexit and like sort of the international era where we're so connected online? How do you see identity, and more specifically national identity, changing from here on out? You want to start, Suki? No. Okay.
I think we should go to the audience.
Okay.
Yeah, because we might run out of time.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah,
I'm not going to. Yeah, I feel we've answered that in different ways, and I think we should go to them so they get a chance to speak.
Sweet. Oh, okay. We've got Jacob down here.
This is a question for Jackie and Reeta. It kind of sounds a little bit like because you both have this experience of like being severed from this kind of cultural background, but then in a way it sounds like it encouraged you to go and seek out stuff. And I was wondering, do you feel that like giving yourself the space to reinvent your cultural identity on your own terms was it all liberating? And if so, could you talk about how you found it to be liberating, specifically like making music and writing poetry, like the ways it kind of developed for both of you? And if that applies to Suki, I don't know what it sounds like you're very much still very rooted in family and stuff, so yeah, specifically Reeta and Jackie.
Yeah, it's hugely liberating. I mean, I met up with my brother earlier this year, and he was saying that, you know, I'm free, like I have all this freedom because I don't have to conform to anything really. So particularly with family, and coming from quite a sort of traditional family as well, there are a lot of pressures on other members of my family that I just don't have to deal with. And so yeah, in that sense, I'm really fortunate. As sad and hard as that loss has been, I'm also really free, and I'm really fortunate to be able to explore my cultural identity for myself, and explore the spirituality and yoga and meditation and different practices that India's gift to the world is spiritual awakening and well-being and practices. It's not tikka masala, do you know what I mean? So so even though that's great too, but so I feel actually there's been loss, but at the same time there is also a lot of opportunity that for me, in terms of my personal journey, I'm really grateful for. And yeah, definitely inform my art and my creativity and my activism, and every part of, essentially everything that I make and that I do and that I talk about and write about comes from that same place.
Yeah, I would agree with Reeta. I think it's a fantastic question. I love the phrasing of it, but I think that it's definitely true that if you can survive the kind of loss and being severed and the feeling of loss, and you can carry that with you, and you realise that the absence and presence are something that we all carry within us in different ways, and that loss actually is a presence after all, and that loss becomes a presence after all, and then you can kind of go ahead with that. It's not necessarily easy, and I wouldn't want to kind of pretend that it was easy, but it's definitely, I think, a strength to be able to reinvent yourself and to be able to be your own woman. And when I was a mum, for instance, a lesbian mum in the late 80s, there weren't many other lesbian mums then. And I remember when my son was 14, I said to him, "It's quite cool having a lesbian mum." He said, it's not cool at all. He said it would be cool to have a lesbian gran. But now he's 30, and sort of a feminist, and he's just made a film about a woman sumo wrestler, and just won a big film award. Yay, hashtag proud mum. But I remember when he was 3, my dad came down to stay, and I was kind of worried that he didn't have enough male role models. So I said to him, go and watch Grandpa shave. And he went up the stairs and he wanted to watch Grandpa shave, and he came down and I said, did you watch Grandpa shave? And he said, yes, but he didn't do it properly. He only went like this. He didn't do his legs. And my dad said to me, you need to be careful you're not bringing that boy up in too esoteric a household. And so the esoteric household is what I think of as a liberating identity. To bring your child up in an esoteric household and to eventually have them be 30 and kind of embracing having had a lesbian feminist mum and being out there doing their own thing and making their own films, that to me is an extraordinary reward. And for ages you feel like you're going against the grain, and for ages you might feel that you're completely alone, but at some point or another something just turns, maybe turns within you or turns outside of you, and that moment, you would call that moment, yes, liberation. And even if you feel like, when I went to Nigeria and met my birth father for the first and only time, and he said to me, so you said in your letter that you didn't want to answer to a man. This is a strange thing to say. So if you're not married and you do not have a boyfriend or such, how do you cater for your sex drive? That's the strangest question from a father. So I said, well, the woman that you spoke to on the phone, she's my partner. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, she's my lover. And he went, oh. You mean you're a lesbian? And he put extra syllables in lesbian. You mean you're a lesbian? I said, yes, that's right. And he went, okay. Which one of you is the man? So it's really strange. There's all of these different things, and you have to sort of just stand up, I suppose, stand up to your Nigerian father, stand up to your Scottish mother when at first you tell her when you're age 17 and you say, how would you feel if I told you that I was a lesbian? And she says, I would be very upset because you would be becoming something I don't know or understand. You wouldn't be Jackie anymore. And I think that initially when we move through, I suppose, different stages of our own identity, we come to places where we suddenly might feel scared because we feel like we might become strangers to ourselves, so there might not be friends or meeting us or waiting, like Reeta was saying. But you just really have to go through these, and I'm kind of, yes, it has been liberating to go through them, but I wouldn't necessarily wish it upon somebody. I wouldn't wish the exact experience that I've had through my life and different kind of racism and bullying. I wouldn't wish it on somebody. I didn't bring my son up in Scotland, for instance, because I didn't trust that he would he would be relaxed enough in his own black identity. So I chose to bring him up in London first and then Manchester, because at that time there didn't feel like any Scottish town that had that kind of cultural ease, and that's changing now. So that's a long answer to your question. But thank you. I want to clap for that. You got it.
Thank you so much for your works. They've been very interesting to listen to. I'm from Kenya and I grew up there, and every time I was in the UK, I was here for university before. Just when in Kenya, the president at that time had taken back a British law that outlawed the Amal, which is the common English. And so the Amal were suing the British for the torture that they underwent during the freedom struggle for our country. And this time I came to Glasgow, and I was at a bar with a friend of mine who's collaborating on a project I'm doing here, and some music started playing, and I had a flashback to being 6 years old in Kenya in school, and learning what was Scottish dancing, right? And I'm not 30 yet, so this is something that's like very recent. And so every time I've been in the UK, there's been like colonial anxieties that flare up. So this question might be coming from a place of that anxiety, because you mentioned about how Glasgow, is it Glasgow? It doesn't have, or was it the whole of Scotland? It doesn't even recognize slavery via museums and the whole well, okay. Yeah, and I was just wondering if there was conversations around like colonial structures and like that, you know, like the colonial impact of Scotland. Because until I had the memory of like Scottish dancing, which I can still do, a lot of the word on the street, or like a lot of the history in Kenya, that it was the English who were doing these things, and you know, the Scottish were colonized by the English, and the Irish were colonized, and so there's like innocent parties, and then there is the parties who are complicit in like the colonial tortures and like the colonial anxieties that we have to this day. So I was just wondering if there's conversation around that, because that feels slightly more contemporary, like you can talk to the people kind of.
Do you want to answer that?
I can answer a bit of it.
Sorry?
I can answer a bit of it. I suppose there are conversations, but as ever, they always take place in silos and in small pockets. And I think there's still massive issues in terms of people in Scotland recognising Scotland's role in colonialism. It's not something that's mainstream, and I think sometimes even when it does come on the radar, I mean, I think that was months back, there was conversations going on about it, and there was a kind of media fury around it, and people were trying to deny it, or they were trying to hide it, and they were trying just not to talk about it. And I think that is always going to be the case until people push it to the agenda, and I think that takes a lot of people. At the minute, I think these conversations tend to be confined to Black History Month, you know, so as much as we talk about Scotland being progressive and all the rest of it, a lot of those conversations aren't mainstream. People just don't want to talk about it, and it makes people very uncomfortable, especially even in the context of Scottish independence. So when you talk about Scotland being progressive and being fundamentally different to England being down there, you know, and the racism that comes from England, people deny that actually those things exist in Scotland. And you know, when we talk about the fact that Scotland is welcoming to refugees and all the rest of it, we welcome refugees because we see them as economic commodities. We don't welcome them for any other reason, you know. So it's about recognising that and having those debates on the platforms that we have. But those conversations aren't happening, and they're not happening often enough. It's definitely an issue.
I know that there's a woman in Glasgow called Sandra Yearman who's working very hard to make that museum happen. And so I hope that there will be a museum in Scotland that looks into Scotland's history of colonialism and of the slave trade, and a black museum in Scotland. So there's a number of people, I think, that are trying to fundraise for that, and there's a whole committee that are set up. I don't know if any of them are here. No? I would have maybe thought maybe some of them might come. But anyway, so I think that's really important, and I think it's important that we examine all of the history. I mean, Glasgow as a city had the tobacco laws, and Glasgow was actually founded as a city. That's why you've got Jamaica Street, Virginia Street. The whole city is full of references to the slave trade that people walking around Glasgow don't know about. They should know about. They should know about it. They should know all of these things. Children in school should know. But Glasgow in a city was also the city that actually fought against slavery, the abolition of slavery, and led some of the opposition. So that doubleness I was talking about earlier is important to remember. And you know, recently, I don't know if any of you saw it, but a couple of years ago, or was it last year? No, it was only just last year, in Edinburgh, at the National Portrait Museum, there was an exhibition on Burns, and there was a black marble Burns made by the Scottish artist Douglas Gordon, and he made this black marble Burns exactly the same as the white marble Burns that's there, and then he smashed it up on the gallery floor. And so you went in and you saw this smashed Burns, and it was really quite affecting, especially if you looked at it from the top. And I wrote a number of poems on Burns to go with this exhibition. But it was amazing to look down, and it made me think that only by smashing something up, or only by criticising something properly and thoroughly, can you actually reclaim it and bring it back. And that we tend to be frightened of criticism as if it's going to lead to the destruction of things, but actually criticism can lead to the creation of things, to the creation of something new. And so I don't think that we should be afraid of it. As a country, I'm talking about in Scotland, I don't think we should be afraid of looking at our past, being honest about it, and perhaps being refreshingly honest about it in lots of different ways. And that's where I think that we should go. I mean, I wrote a play that was on the radio quite a while ago called The Lamplighter, which was about Scotland's relationship with the slave trade, not just Scotland's, but the whole of the UK's, Bristol as well. But it was really interesting to see the reaction to that play, particularly in Scotland, because the other places in the UK had learnt to deal with that history, or started to deal with it, but Scotland was the only place that hadn't. And I think that's really, that makes me feel, embarrassed. I think that's got to change.
Jackie, just to say, we have one of the people who do the slave history walks here.
Oh, good.
Abigail Ramsey is here, and
Oh,
she
good.
actually walks every Black History Month with Loretta.
Good.
And does the slave history walk.
Good and great.
Fantastic. I think we might have enough time for one more question.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. It means so much to have this space where we can talk about things others that are marginalized us for, and it's just a nice thing to see that people are able to openly talk about their experiences. So I've got a fun question for everyone on the panel. What is your favorite response to no, where are you really from?
It depends who's asking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but well, with some people, I can legitimately say, well, my dad's from Glasgow, my mum's from Fife, and they'll look surprised, and they'll go, and their parents, and I'll say Glasgow and Fife, and their parents, Glasgow and Fife, so it's gone like that for a very long time, and then with other people who are just actually curious I could say my father's from Nigeria and my mother's from the Highlands in Scotland, but I didn't grow up with either of them. I grew up with Scottish communists. And if I want to give them a lengthy answer, I can say my birth mother's now, or was, a Mormon living in Milton Keynes, and my birth father is a born-again Christian living in Nigeria, and my parents that brought me up are communists. And so I find that interesting, the belief systems. But yes, it depends how long you've got, and also what the question's intended to get at, because sometimes people are sneakily trying to find out something, and I would rather they just ask me frankly what it was that they were trying to find out. It annoys me when people go around through the back door to do something. So I prefer that. I actually preferred the woman that I said earlier saying you foreign-looking bugger, because at least she just came out with it. It was it was like a relief compared to some of the other things that you've gone through, But I remember going into this school once, and the woman didn't know what I looked like, because often if people listen to you on the phone, they don't necessarily form your own face, do they? And everybody's had that experience, so in some way or another. And then she couldn't have to get over her surprise. She said to me, "Do you know, I've heard you a lot on the radio, and in my mind you were tall and slender." And then she said, "Never mind, your voice is Highland water going over stones." So, scraping the barrel for a compliment, but anyway, Highland water going over stones. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. What do you say? What do you say?
Yeah, it totally depends who's asking, what I think their intention is, and what mood I'm in, and how bothered I can be, really. So yeah, sort of Hackney, Brixton, Winchester, Southall, Yeah, one of my peeps in the house. You know, Jalandhar, Mumbai. I mean, it just depends, like, who I'm talking to, and what the intention is. And my mood, like, if I feel like they're being direct and honest and genuine, or I feel safe, then I'll bother. But most of the time, I'll just keep saying Hackney over and over again. Same thing.
Yes, I suppose because we intuit that behind the question is you don't belong here, and if we're assuming that that's behind the question, then we won't give the answer that they're wanting, because we'll know, and we actually, all of us know the difference, so that's why we'll have different answers.
Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, it really just depends on the context and the tone, doesn't it? And how someone's saying that to you. As a socialist, obviously, you know, I'm of the belief that you need to try and break down barriers, so you try and have that conversation with someone, regardless of how they say it. But, you know, it does depend on how you're feeling that day and what your mood is, because you do, I mean, inadvertently, you do start to get really angry about having to have that constant conversation. I mean, can you not hear the accent? You know, you do get angry, but... I
know it's very funny if people actually can't hear once they see a face and they assume that face is not from here, then they actually cut out the accent altogether. And I find that extraordinary, because I think, God, what the hell's going on? You know, very strange. But you know, I was telling you that strange Drimin story, the Dominican Republic. This year, my son treated me to a holiday, and he wouldn't tell me where we were going. It was a surprise. And then 2 days before, he said he'd give me a clue. And the clue was Drimin. So I got it. I said, the Dominican Republic. And he said, yes. So we went to the Dominican Republic, which was kind of amazing. And he saved up his air miles for 3 years so he could fly me business. And but then when I got to the Dominican Republic, for a start, Jacqueline's a very common name there. And for a second, lots of people really looked like me. And it was the most at-home place that I've ever felt like. And lots of people kept coming up and asking me if I was Dominican. So much so that my mum said, my son said, "Oh, maybe that woman that came up here in the shop." You know, so it was kind of another end to that story, which was kind of lovely.
But by the way, just one more answer to that. The last person I will tell where I'm from is like older Indian ladies, because they're usually trying to like hook me up with one of their nephews or something.
Yeah, don't tell them.
Nah.
I usually like to be honest and just be like, oh, I just came from Tesco. But yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks to all our panelists. Round of applause.